This is the January 20th, 2023 meeting of the Real Estate and Open Space Committee. I'd like to call the meeting to order. First order of business is to approve the minutes from our regular session on November 18th, 2022. Has everybody received their copy of the minutes?
Yes.
Yes.
Any comments or changes, or
I
are
would
we all
move,
good?
move approval.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Welcome our guests. See Brianna back there. Brianna Nickerson is the Town of Harwich's housing advocate. Brianna, would you like to come up to the table here and just kind of, I'll introduce us all and you can tell us what you're going to be up to,
Definitely. Here.
wherever you're comfortable.
Okay, I'll stay here.
Okay, I think we could go around and make introductions because we also have folks who don't know.
Oh, Kathy Green.
Margot Fenn.
Elaine Shovlin.
Marcy Smith.
Dave Callahan.
Nice to meet you all. I'm Brianna.
Yeah, good morning, Brianna.
Morning. So, yep, part of what I'll be doing is working on housing programs for, affordable housing, market rate, all different types of housing programs, communicating with the public, educating the public, and kind of being a liaison between different committees.
Good, okay. So sometimes we see a property that we think might be suitable for housing. Would we then talk to you about
Yeah,
it? Bring it
definitely.
to you for, yeah.
Yep, that would be great.
Because our usual thing is to, when a property comes to our attention, we usually walk the property, do an evaluation, see what it's suitable for, whether it's conservation housing or municipal use, and then make a recommendation to the Board of Selectmen. But I think when we, do have a property like that now, we'll touch base with you.
Yeah, I would like to be included in whatever
sure.
part of that you'd want me in.
Oh, yeah, no,
Yeah.
we'd love to have you take part in helping us with this.
Great.
Thank you so much.
Yeah,
Wish
thank you.
well. Thank you. Thank you for joining us. Gail, you're up. Like I said, wherever you're comfortable. Introduce yourself to the public at home.
Good morning. I'm Gail McAleer, and I am currently serving as the interim assessing director for the town of Harwich.
Now, I had sent you our spreadsheets that we had made recommendations to the Board of Selectmen on properties, and I had asked you just to glance over and see if you can kind of bring us up to date on things that might have been resolved, and because we don't know what happens, we don't know where things are. Some things could have already, somebody could have shown up with a deed, for an owner's unknown, or it could have gone to foreclosure, or who knows? We don't, and that's the problem,
All right. So, since this is such a vital committee in this area, I just wanted to share with you a little bit of a background of where we are,
Sure.
where we've been, and where we're going, kind of a thing. So, I'll try to be as brief as possible, but it's kind of a long tale.
That's okay. I think we're all very interested in this story.
Okay, so just sort of who I am a little bit is that I was an assessor for 20 years before I retired about 7 years ago from the town of Eastham. I was the assessor in Eastham for almost 14 years. Before that, in between those times, well, I started as an assessor in 1990. I was elected at that point in time. Most were. Most municipal officials were elected at that time. And PK Valuation Group was our valuation consultant in Webster, Massachusetts, Central Mass, Sturbridge, Worcester area. About 6,500 parcels or so. Quite a good size amount of commercial. Good town to cut your teeth on, really. And so I ran for 2 terms, 6 years before moving to the Cape in '96. So when I left there, I started working for PK Valuation Group. And during that time, they were assessing offices were just starting to get computerized in 1997, 98. Before that, everything was pretty much done by hand, which lays the foundation for the why, how did we get here kind of situation. And so I started doing training and those kinds of things for PK for many years. And then I began working again. I wasn't sure I wanted to be an assessor again after being an elected assessor, where every voter who voted for you thinks you work for them. So it was hard to get things done by the constant parade of people, beautiful, wonderful people, but very time-consuming. But I became an appointed assessor in Eastham, which was a lot different. There, when I first started in 2000, digital mapping was fairly new. It was just coming into municipalities, into digital mapping for assessing maps and such. And the state of Massachusetts was exploring that and starting to venture into that because, of course, they had the whole state with highways and all kinds of things that they were recognizing very early on about the benefits of digital mapping. So Eastham had just started. They had their parcel map, basically, they call it digitized, but by the Cape Cod Commission for free. And all they did was take the old hand-drawn Mylars, put it on a light table, and trace the outlines of all the parcels. There wasn't an associated database with it, so there was no annotation, they call it, labeling map parcel, ownership information, size of the parcel, street names. There was no information. It was just, there were these big sheets of lines on a paper. And so I began to learn about digital mapping and said, wow, this is a wonderful tool. We need this. And so at that time, Massachusetts GIS systems were really ramping up, and they saw that it was going to be too monumental of a task if they tried to digitally map the entire state of Massachusetts. So they said, well, why don't we subsidize cities and towns and get them going on creating their digital mapping systems, and then they can send it to us. And that's what we did. And so the state paid for the early digital maps for not the big cities, but a lot of the smaller ones, especially, that had no budget for those kinds of things. And they kept upping the ante. They'd say, okay, well, we'll give you money if you meet these criteria with your maps. So many records, so many records that have a matching parcel to them. And then they'd say, okay, well, now you have to have, at least this percentage of all your parcels have to have what they call polygons parcels. So anyway, that's how we began our mapping in Eastham. At the time, when we first were digitally mapped, prior to that, it was all done by hand. There were values were calculated on paper field cards. If you've ever seen a paper field card in the assessing office, all the calculations were done manually. We didn't revalue every year. It was too onerous of a task. And so it was only after the maps were digitized was this connection made between parcels that had no record in the CAMA system, they called it, the assessing records. There were no, in the assessing software, there were no matching parcels. And so when I first started in Eastham, there were about 250 of those. Most of them were exempt properties, state-owned, town-owned, because the process was so onerous to do it manually, anything that didn't generate revenue, why bother? So there weren't records. So when I started with that, it was like, okay, now I've got some 250 odd parcels. I'm pretty confident that they're owned by some exempt parcel owner, state, town. But then I had to start matching up these ancient deeds going back to the king practically to all of this long list of parcels. It took me about 2.5 years to do that project. And I knew who owned them for the most part. Luckily, the National Seashore was also digitally mapping their parcels, and they had somebody who worked for them that just did digital mapping. That was his charge. So he was doing a lot of research on the seashore parcels, and I was working on the town parcels. So over that course of time, we were able to find them all and match up the deeds, which was relevant because sometimes we had to have a deed to know. That's the selectmen were saying, well, how was this taken for municipal purposes, for conservation? You know, there was no specified use. And that was critical if they were going to start doing something with these pieces of land. And at that time, we couldn't say. We had no knowledge of what was what, or very little knowledge. I mean, obviously, school buildings, improved parcels, there were records for, but vacant parcels, not so much. So I've been there on that. I've done that before. So when I came here as a consultant for PK. I still work for them now. After I retired, I train assessors on how to be assessors. I train their staffs. I train them on the PK software. Part-time. I'm retired. I was. I keep trying to be. But anyway, but I live in Harwich. This is my town. So I care about this town. I don't have to travel as far as I usually do to train. I really enjoyed it. And, I was working for the first 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 5 weeks when Donna was out, and there was a defined period of time. It was short term. Excuse me. But as I was here, that's when I came to my awareness about these parcels and this situation. And as I began to research it, it's like, oh my goodness. It started off with that, like, oh, you're kidding. And then it was like, oh my God. Oh no.
Welcome to our world.
Oh no. Oh, you got to be kidding me. Why isn't anybody screaming from from the rooftops about this? And so then shortly after that, Donna retired. And I said, to the administration and anyone who would listen, you got to do something about this. I can help. I'd be willing to help. Whatever, but somebody's got to do something about this. I live in this town too, and this is important to all of us. So I have started to really dig into it, and so what I found in the early days was it looked very similar to what I'd seen before. It looked as if early days of mapping, these parcels emerged. Unlike in Eastham, it was fairly clearly defined as I started researching it there that they were exempt properties. And I suspect that a good many of these are as well. I expect that's what we're going to find. But what I'm finding in this town more as we do this project, it's now referred to as the Article 39 project, because that is the article at town meeting that appropriated $500,000 for this project. I used to call it the Parcel Discovery Project, but it's now called the Article 39 Project, so that's how I refer to it. And what I was finding is that in a lot of instances, these are parcels that were owned. We have deeds going back to the early 1800s. People have died. I'll share an example that has just come to light. That was brought up by I think the selectman asked me about it, or the town administrator. I'm not quite sure. I think it was in conjunction with both of them. It was the property owned by Judah Eldridge.
Yes,
That's one of the.
We're very much aware of that project.
Okay, so that's a recent example of a scenario that, as we have just started to wade in, where we've only got a few toes in this water at this point, only because I'll make my excuses in a few moments. But so on Judah Eldridge, I should back up one step and say, luckily, thank goodness, as we began to look around the office, just, I'm saying, somebody has to have done something with this over the years. This can't just, people weren't just not looking at it. So, in fact, Michael Ford, when he was the attorney, when he was working for the town, did a significant amount of title work. And there's a gentleman named James Falla, I believe. He's an attorney. Oh my gosh, I have come to, I don't even know who he is or if he's alive still, but his work, he's alive still?
Yes, he
I
lives in
have-
Chatham.
He's in Chatham? I have to meet this man. His work is phenomenal. And I only came to know his work a little bit through this Judah Eldridge title search that he did. So detailed, so labor intensive. It must have just taken hundreds of hours. But what he found was this lovely deed back to the 1800s from, and I can't remember the woman's name. It was something like Friendly. Her name was Friendly, I believe. Friendly somebody who actually conveyed this. It's a 3.3 acre parcel, I believe. And there's some other little couple of bits around that we're not quite sure of yet. But the main parcel was about a little over 3 acres. And it was in the 1800s, can't remember the year, but 1800s, Friendly conveyed it to Judah. They did a title search from the 1800s forward, looking from when Judah died, it went to the wife, from the wife, the children, but they tracked it from this, then the spider work happens with the children and bequeathing to the children and the children bequeathing to the children. So that, but they went through some of the root ones, the root where there were deeds, where the parcels had been mentioned mostly in probate. A lot of them died without wills, so there were they weren't probated. That's one of the main issues with a lot of these older deeds, is they weren't ever probated. They died intestate without a will, and it just kind of died. The breadcrumb trails dies with them, and it's a challenge. So this person, they went through all these probate records through the main trunk of the tree and saw that it didn't get split out at all. It went intact, basically, in very loose verbiage, such as all land I own in Harwich, or that piece of land up there and so, and that piece of land. It's very loosely described, but never was it called out with any kind of specificity that would say, yes, this was it, and they gave half to this one and half to that one. It was always, it seemed as if they never found any place where it actually was subdivided. So it appeared to move through this long genealogical tree intact with the 3.3 acres. His conclusion at the end, after doing all of this and following the spider web of ancestry through the generations, concluded that at the time of the report, which I believe was 1996, that the parcel was owned by 432 heirs of Judah Eldridge. What do you do with that? You know, you can't assess that many people. But early days, when I first started this process, I realized that in many cases, such as this particular parcel, the only logical way and legal way to assess this parcel is to the heirs of Judah Eldridge. That's how we have to do it. So in the collector's office, there's, I don't know his last name, Jim, that's all I know. He's an attorney, he's a title attorney. He works with them on town takings and consults with them. And Amy asked him about that. What is, because I had said, the estate of, the heirs of, how do I differentiate? How do I know when to use which one? And he said, if the estate has been probated and an executor or executrix has been appointed, then it's the estate of. But if it's not in probate, it's not been probated, there isn't a known designated person that's administering the estate, then it's the heirs of. And so I confirmed that with many different opinions that were rendered by the Department of Revenue as far as owner unknown property. When could we legally assess a property as owner unknown? And the Department of Revenue, recognizing the fact that assessors are not title attorneys, and we don't have unlimited time. We can't bill by the hour. We still have an assessing department to run. And so they said, basically, assessors have to do their due diligence. That's what they say, due diligence. And if we've done our due diligence, we've actually looked on the Registry of Deeds, which is online, accessible to anybody. If we've done our due diligence, we have tried to search the probate records, the Registry of Deeds records, and we are unable to, we come to a dead end, basically, literally and figuratively. We can't find the owner of today, the current owner. All we can do is find Judah Eldridge. That's the last known deed. And the Judah Eldridge deeds, a lot of them don't really call out anything other than it basically says, by the ditch and by the Jones and by the Smith farm, and, they're oftentimes very vague. So they said if assessors, they're only tasked with doing their due diligence, and then it's perfectly legal to assess an owner to the heir of or the estate of, whichever is appropriate. And so that's what we've started to do in those cases, and that's how we actually will be billing that parcel for FY24, because it's, I'll explain that in a moment. And so we're going to assess it to the heirs of. Now, we have no known address for Judah Eldridge other than perhaps, we don't have an address for Judah Eldridge. And so we use the town's address. And the bills come back, obviously, at some point in time. I don't know, I'm not a lawyer, I don't know how that progresses through, but it's I've seen in recent years, they can be, foreclosed on, taken for back taxes, foreclosed on.
I think the intent now with the Board of Selectmen is to take it by eminent domain.
That's
They've already surveyed and getting a new appraisal and,
perfect.
yeah.
And that was one of the recommendations in the Fowler report, was that we don't really know because the vague description of the parcel. We haven't mapped. It is mapped on the assessor's maps, but a lot of times it's what's left over. We have plans for the parcels around it, so those were all mapped, and then what's left over is that little piece in the middle, and we say, oh, that's the Judah parcel. And so the survey is necessary to really delineate the actual meets and bounds of that parcel. So I recommended that as well, so I'm glad that's what that money is for as well.
Yeah, I think they already have it scheduled to put the notice in the newspaper.
Perfect.
It's moving along now.
Perfect.
How
I
long, how
love
many
it.
years have we been talking about Judah Eldridge? Dave, you're the, at least 8 years.
Wow. I mean, it's not uncommon. I'm hearing that over and over and over again, and I try not to listen too much because it just makes my mind go crazy. And but anyway, so yes. So I read the Fowler report. I told them about it. I said, I concur. I concur with everything he said. And yes, get it surveyed and get it done.
Right.
And take that one off the list.
And I think the other night at the Board of Selectmen meeting, the chair mentioned that he wants this done so it'll go to town meeting in May
Great.
and finally
Love it.
be resolved.
Finally. And that is,
Something like that.
Are you talking about the 24-acre Judah Eldridge?
no,
What are you talking about?
Yes.
I'm talking about a 3.3.
We're talking about different things here, I think.
Do you know that, where was it
Yeah, I thought it was
located?
bigger than 3.
It is, it's 24 acres, what we know. I think she's referring to something else. That's why I'm confused.
well,
Oh, okay.
I'm talking to about a 3.3 acre parcel, not 24 acres. But there are little small parcels next to it, but they're nowhere near any other kind of, there's a little like half acre piece next to it, above it and below it.
Is this on Hawks Nest Road?
Yes.
That's on there 26 acres. It's been assessed, and taxes have been accruing on that for some period of time because the taxes due are someplace.
Then we
now
must be
about
talking about two different,
$400,000.
we must be talking about two different things then.
So that's what
Oh,
I'm trying to say.
She's
Okay.
referring to something else.
And then,
I realize
that's,
that, but I'm just saying.
that is interesting because I should find out. I thought the Judah Eldridge deed that I'm talking about in the 1800s clearly references 3.3 acres. And that's what I rendered an opinion on. So if there's another parcel, if they're talking here and I'm talking here, then I need to clarify that.
I'd be glad to be here for the meeting.
Okay,
So,
good.
yeah.
Yes, because, yes. Now, speaking of the 24 acres, on the parcels that you asked me about initially, when we, okay, let me back up a minute. Let me fill in couple of little details here, facts about things. No, I'll save that. So, initially, when I first started, we found out about the problem. I started having everybody pull all the resources that we had in the office, the Fowler reports, Michael Ford's title search work that he had done, a lot of different pieces and parts that we had, and they were scattered all over the place. So we then said, okay, we had a little bit of time. It was in the fall. Carly Jones, who is our assistant assessor, she's been there 5 years or so now, and she's been doing the deeds and the transfers during that period of time. So she had become very familiar with the registry and looking up deeds. Sometimes we get a deed in and it doesn't match anything, and so she has to sometimes do a small title search in order to clarify and make sure that she's transferring the correct parcel to the new person. And so she was fantastic. She's been fantastic through this process. And then we had another full-time person in our office who really caught on quickly. And so we had the three of us. I'm contracted for 18 hours a week. So instead of 3 full-time people, we had 2 full-time people and me. But it was a fairly slow period in the late summer, early fall. So we had maybe a month and a half that we were able to really focus on this. So we started first on I don't think we had that report at that point in time, but we thought, okay, well, we'll look at some of these larger ones and we'll start with those. Well, it didn't
Now, are you
take,
talking about owners unknown?
we're talking about some owners unknown, but we actually haven't gotten into owners unknown as much. We were talking about, that we have a whole lot of parcels that they're not in the assessing database at all.
Okay, well,
There is no record, so they are not getting bills.
we've been charged by the Board of Selectmen to focus on
Owners
unknown and miscellaneous, which I know is a whole nother.
Oh, goodness.
But owners unknown is really what we're trying
Oh.
to clear up.
The problem is that with the mapping that we're doing and some of the decisions we're, looking at, if they've got records that aren't yet tied to those parcels, those maps, we're making a wrong assumption that it's owners unknown.
Mhm.
So it's,
They all dovetail together.
and they dovetail together. You can't just go focus on one area, owners unknown, because, we got all these little maps with all those red spots that unknown, but maybe
We have
they are known.
parcels that, at least owner unknown is getting a tax bill, so they're accruing back taxes and perhaps could be foreclosed on or whatever. There are parcels, like I mentioned in Eastham, where I'm assuming when the maps were created, they didn't exist in the system, in the assessing software, and they've just never been entered in the software. So we were starting on those where they're not getting billed. They're not getting billed.
Yeah.
This Judah Eldridge one, the 3.3 acre parcel, is one of those that, when you look at the map, there's just a shape, but there's no map parcel number. There's no information about it. It's just, I call them polygons. That's a GIS
Well,
term.
on the tax collector's lien list, I think December 1st was the last up-to-date one that I had gotten. There was 25 owners unknown on there, on the tax lien list. Okay. 12 of them were the properties that went to auction. So that brings us down to 13, okay? And then there are others, like the water department. There was properties at the water department that were taking that were owners unknown. So really, we're down to maybe 6 or 7 that we're aware of, that were on the tax lien, the latest tax lien list that I had as of December. So we're down to them.
Mhm.
And I think for our next meeting, those are the ones maybe we should look at to see.
But I think what Gail is saying is that those are important, but when we put together this list and the map, we queued these to the assessor's map so we could see where they are. The ones that are highlighted in green here are big parcels that are not assessed, that have no map and parcel number, and that in some ways are the most significant thing on here because of their size and location. And I think these are the biggest, the highest priorities to try to, figure out. And in some cases, for example, the sand pit north of Queen Anne Road, not the one in East Harwich, but the other one. They call it the Deleuze sand pit.
By Cornelius Pond.
By Cornelius
Jay-Z's
Pond,
Drive.
yeah. That, it's a curious thing that it's, in the assessor's record, it's treated as owner's unknown. It doesn't have a parcel number. It's a great big, huge chunk of land. And yet, people hunt and do target practice and ride their dirt bikes in there. And if you call the police department to complain about any of those activities there, because it's right next to a Harwich Conservation Trust property,
Wow.
the police department will tell you, oh, the owners have authorized that. Oh, that's interesting. Well, who are the owners? And so it's like the right hand doesn't know what the left hand's doing here. And it seems to me that if there was a place for the assessing department, the biggest bang for the buck is to look at those big parcels like that.
Did you get a chance to look at those, Gail?
Yeah.
Did you have any information on any of those in particular?
Those parcels, so when we first started, when we finally gathered our resources and said, okay, let's try to tackle this, now we have some people here. And so we started, we said, okay, well, let's go for the big ticket items first, let's find the big ones. When you have, starting with a parcel that has no information on it, there's no record that exists in the computer, there's no place to start. The place you have to start is from the fringe. You start from the abutters. And you start pulling all the deeds and plans from all the abutters. And you see who their deeds call out on that side. And as they collectively call out on those sides, you start to get names, and then you start to trace those names, and you try to find something that now calls out that abutter. And you say, oh, okay, so this deed, now this abutter calls out this name, and this deed calls out that abutter. What we found on the first few that we looked at, I think we started with one of the 60-acre parcels, is that it's not 60 acres anymore. It's been subdivided.
Yeah.
So we could only go a little ways, and then all of a sudden, the abutters are calling out a different abutter. They're not calling out the one name. They're calling out multiple names. And with a 60-acre parcel, we're finding out there's a little 1-acre parcel here and a 1-acre parcel here, and so it's been subdivided. We knew we only had a limited amount of time before it was going to be tax rate setting time, getting the tax bills out. We had a little small window, so we said, okay, we can't start with that. We're just going to get mired in that. So we started on others that had either a Fowler report or a Mike Ford report or something else like that. Because what we found was that all this work had been done. All this work has been done. And it was brought right up to the finish line, but never done. So, like that Fowler report, I read the Fowler report, I checked the data, went through it and said, Eldridge owns this 3.3 acre parcel. let's create the record, let's put it on the rolls, done. Okay, next. And so I decided, I didn't mean to say anything, slight the committee in any way, but I decided that our best bet, I'll just back up 1 second, and I'm in a second, but our best bet is to start identifying as many of these parcels as we can and start sort of stitching together this tapestry and pick up, hopefully, some of these other parcels as we go along. The more holes we fill in, the more ownership we know now. In many cases, here's something not owner unknown literally and not in the system. I differentiate between owner unknown, where at least there's a process of auction or some other methodology to eventually, now those properties are now sold. The town took them, so there's a title. They're sold at auction now legally. There's a deed, and now there's a clear chain of title that's being formed for those parcels.
May I just ask a question? On the parcels that were not sold at the second auction were then supposed to be deeded to the town. Have you received deeds on those properties yet?
I can't speak to that. I don't think so, but I think it's in the works. If we don't have it yet, it's in process.
Now, I
And
thought you had mentioned to me that someone showed up with a deed for one of those.
they did. There was a parcel, they owned an abutting parcel, and their deed actually included, there was an error on the assessing maps. It wasn't drawn properly at some point, way back when. And they had been paying taxes on their larger piece, which included that separate parcel. It was never split out. But the town was assessing that separate parcel to an owner unknown, and so they never knew there were unpaid taxes on a piece of their land, because they were always paying taxes on their parcel. And so when they realized it was getting auctioned off, they said, "Excuse me, wait a second, that's part of my larger parcel." And so they came, they asked me to double check that, and sure enough, it was part of their larger parcel, and they had paid the taxes on that larger parcel the whole time.
Well, it's a good thing it didn't get auctioned off. Yes, Kathy.
Yeah, I'm just trying to understand what the finish line is. So, going back to this 3-point-something acre parcel with 400 heirs, are you saying that the finish line for your office is making that determination and then assessing each and every one of those heirs? So how do you assess? Do you assess them as the town of Harwich?
The heirs of Judah Eldridge,
Right.
that's legally assessed. We can legally assess a tax bill.
The terminology, that name,
That
heirs
name.
of Judah Eldridge.
Heirs of
But we have no address for them.
No, so we
So-
only use the town's
Okay,
address.
so do you actually send a tax bill
Yes.
to the heirs of Judah Eldridge at our address here,
Yes,
which doesn't go anywhere?
yes.
And then how long is the process before it goes into some other, aforementioned tax lien, foreclosure, eminent domain, whatever the process might be? How long, is there a time frame that the DOR requires for it to be like that?
There's no requirement, but from what I understand from Elaine, well, if we're talking the same parcel, if it's the 3.3 that I'm talking about, it sounds as if they're going through eminent domain. The process of foreclosure is in the collector's domain.
Right.
And it's my understanding that now that there's a little head of steam built up around this project, that things are funneling through more quickly. In years past, there would be back taxes on them, but like some of those parcels that were auctioned recently were taken a long, long time ago. So sometimes they just kind of languish. There's a little bit of I don't know if it's because they were owner unknown. If a person has back taxes and a person doesn't pay their taxes over a period of time, that oftentimes moves through more quickly. But there's oftentimes a reluctance on the part of the town to take a
Right.
person's property.
Right.
They'll try to give them every opportunity to get right with the board and keep their property. So it's not something the town does gleefully, for sure. But in cases where, they advertise it, no one comes forward, no one addresses the back taxes, then there's very little remedy left but to take it.
But so for the assessor's office, which is who you're representing,
Right.
your finish line is to be able to
Get a tax bill out.
get a tax bill out. Okay, I just wanted clarification on that.
Yes, that's a good question, thank you. Yeah, that's our charge, is to assess properties in the town of Harwich fairly and equitably. And that's what we're trying to do now, is assess everybody fairly and equitably. We can't do that until we figure out who owns the property, who to assess. So that's our first goal, is to figure out who to assess.
But we all know that the heirs of Judah Eldridge, there's no one to really assess.
But the law says we can still legally assess the heirs of Judah Eldridge. If after due diligence, that's all we can determine, that is a bill that is legally assessed, and that's the key. I can't just say, well, I did this little bit of thing, and it looks, somebody came in and they said, so-and-so owns it. Oh, good, I'll just assess it to so-and-so. That's not a legally assessed bill. I haven't done due diligence. In order to send out a tax bill to somebody, we have to see, and I think that was a question that was posed. In order to send out a tax bill, someone just can't walk in the door and say, here's my deed for this parcel, and I look at it and it says, buy a ditch, buy Jones, buy Smith, and buy a stream. That doesn't fly. I have to be able to see that plan, or the deed, and oftentimes in the 1800s, there's very few plans, but that deed, I need more than that. I need a chain of title. I need to see how you got it from that person, because there are these old handwritten deeds. That doesn't convince me. I need to see more than that. And so when I can see that chain of title, and in the case of Eldridge, it goes back to the 1800s, and that's basically, other than that, and some probate after that, which is also in the chain of title. I have to see that, something that connects you. I just can't see a deed that spontaneously appears that says, from some heir, all my rights, titles, and interest to this parcel in Harwich. Well, it's very possible that those rights, title, and interest is only 432 of that percent of that parcel, and so that doesn't make you the owner of that parcel.
So is it your office that calls for the survey that says this property needs, does every property ultimately need to be surveyed?
No.
Okay.
If there's sufficient description in a deed, and for many, many properties, there's sufficient description in a deed to identify. We just need to be able to identify on the ground where that parcel is located. If the description is adequate to do that without a plan, then it's not necessary. If there's a plan, thank goodness there's a plan. That's so much easier to work with. Many of these older deeds are in rods and chains. That's how they were measured back then, and so that was what they had, but it was like a 33-foot long metal rod that they would stick one end in the ground, and it would flop down, and they'd go to that end and pick it up and flop down, and that's how many rods. And if it was less than 33 feet, then they would use chain for the last bits, and they would measure. So it was so many rods and so many chains. So in a lot of old subdivisions that were done, if you start measuring from the corners in, the last middle lot won't match, because they were just not that technical back then. They weren't that accurate back then. So that's why a lot of people will go to land court and they'll bring in, transits and high level of accuracy surveying devices. and have them surveyed and then go through the process of going to land court and having their meets and bounds delineated. Because so you don't have people saying, well, that's my lot line, no, that's my lot line, when you've got those old surveying techniques.
Gail, stepping back just a bit, you mentioned that your office makes the decision on when someone claims ownership, and that may be a percentage. Is there a percentage cutoff where you say, okay, you've got 51% or 50%
Yeah.
whatever?
That's a question that gets asked a lot, and it actually has been asked to the Department of Revenue and the lawyers there, and there isn't anything defined in statute, but again, that due diligence comes into play. If there's not that many heirs and someone has really, I've got a pile of where they've done genealogical research and they've got deeded rights from all these different heirs, and that would typically be alive at this point in time. I haven't come across that ever, so I can't say I've not done anything like that at this point in time. So
The reason I ask is because there's a development that occurred up on Route 39, right alongside Thompson's Field. And I know that there were questions about, they came in and suddenly clearing, they were, digging holes. I raised heck here when they were digging the test pits, because that was part of that's the Little Shaver,
Right.
part of that
Right,
Little
yeah.
Shaver Lane. We refer to it as the Little Shaver Lane property that's been on the list since I joined the committee in 2012.
mhm.
What was it? It was one of those, they found it, I don't know how they ever got the what they put in. And so, but they're still for sale right now. They are for sale right now. And that's why it's a question. That was a high priority and remains a high priority parcel for us.
Mhm.
So that's one of the reasons we want to get some clarity on that, because it was 35 acres, I think. And it's in zone 2, and a whole bunch of reasons to protect the water.
Yeah, so we would look at deeds and we look at plans. Now, since I've been here, there's been a few plans that I've seen and a few deeds that I've seen that people were very creative in the process of that, the creation of those documents. And my response when I see things like that, I have certain criteria for a plan. It has to have the stamp of a licensed surveyor. If a licensed surveyor is willing to put their license on the line and stamp a plan saying, I attest to the accuracy of this plan,
Yeah.
that's high on my list. If it's signed by the members of the planning board, whether it's an A&R plan or it's not, whatever, if they've signed it, I know, now we have a planner, but I know John before, he would do a huge amount of title work when a plan came to him to make sure of that, to certify ownership of that parcel before the planning board would agree to subdivide it or whatever. So if planning board signed off on it recently, I don't know about in the past, but
Yeah.
recently,
Don't rely on the past.
I've heard, so I should qualify that, recently. If the abutters are called out in any kind of accurate way with a book and a page or something like that, that I can check, if the abutters are called out. And those are my three main ones. And then, of course, however it looks, and if it matches our current parcels, the original parcel matched our current parcels, and the corresponding deed to it matches. There's a chain of title to the corresponding deed, so it has to meet a whole lot of criteria before before it passes muster. And so I just get a plan, and it's just a shape, and there's a butter's called out, and the surveyor has the name on it, but it says, I don't attest to the accuracy of this plan. Well, I don't either then. I don't give it any weight. That, to me, that's not anything I can work with, and I usually suggest to whoever submitted it that they need more information.
What comes up, it's been mentioned frequently lately, that a little over $1 million worth of properties have been put back on the tax.
Yes, I actually printed that out for you.
Oh, bless you. I was just wondering if any of them are, any of the properties that we had.
No, I don't think so.
All right.
The ones that you had, we started on those. We basically only had a month and a half to work on this.
Yeah.
I'm sort of skipping around, but I'll sort of go there. So we had that little short window when I first started, when it was relatively quiet. There were these parcels, all these parcels kept coming up. I mean, there was never quiet because these things have been on fire for
Right.
years, and so they started coming at us early days. So we started trying to work on those at the beginning, but when we found out that they weren't big parcels anymore, they were little parcels, and it was going to be like a scavenger hunt, trying to find multiple owners when we had no place to start, that was going to take more time. And when I realized the magnitude of the problem, I decided to start working on ones where we had some initial information to work with. And so as information came to us through those different sources, or we were requested about specific parcels, that we had one of these reports that were written before, that I could at least use that as a starting place. If it didn't have any conclusions, at least it gave me some books and pages to work on my search from. And Carly's been fantastic in this process. So it wasn't just me, I say I, but it wasn't just I, it's a we. And so those are the ones that we found. I'll just give them to you, and you can look at them while I won't really go into them into detail, because it's, to be honest with you, this was last fall, and I can't always remember what I did last week. So, especially to the detail that we had to go into on these particular
I
parcels.
can relate to that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So, I was,
Thank you.
whoops, one more.
Thank you.
Are there any other members that aren't here? that
Yeah,
you-
Carol.
Yeah,
I'll
just
take
one, yes.
One for her.
Carol.
All right, so those are the ones that we found right away. Now, the other thing that plays in this is that was, actually, this was for fiscal year '23. Actually, fiscal year '22. Fiscal year '22. So it must have been this was earlier in the summer, in the late spring, early summer. Time flies when you're having fun. But the law says that for any given fiscal year, and this was also one of the questions that was asked before, in any given fiscal year, a municipality has until June 20th to issue revised or omitted tax bills.
I was just going to ask you what that meant.
After June 20th, the tax year is in the can. It's coming up to the end of the fiscal year, June 30th. And if it's not billed by June 20th, it can't ever be billed. Period. That's it.
So
End of
what does
story.
omitted mean in this type?
So omitted is one that was not in the system. It
Okay,
was
so
never
that's-
billed and I can't say it was never billed before. It might have been billed in the 1800s, but I didn't go back that far. But it was not currently in the assessing system. So in our records, we didn't show it having been billed. It certainly wasn't billed for '22, and it wasn't billed going back as far as we could find it. So the others were, a lot of those others, some of them you can see that where it said, that doesn't show on here, the revised ones, in many cases, they were being assessed as miscellaneous to certain people. They were already being assessed to certain people, like like one of the names, well, they were already being assessed, I don't want to get into names, but they were already being assessed, but this is public record, this is not secret. This was for the Department of Revenue, we had to report it to the Department of Revenue, all revised and omitted assessments, because it increases our growth, which we report annually to the Department of Revenue, and also it increased our total levy, so we report this to the Department of Revenue.
So some of these were
Miscellaneous.
miscellaneous.
Yes, so they were being taxed. All the revised were ones that were already being taxed. Now, the miscellaneouses, gosh,
What does it mean to say that it's miscellaneous?
Which, as December, there was 83 of them on the tax lien list, miscellaneous.
okay, deep breaths. I don't know how it began. I'm assuming they were some of these original parcels unknown where they're polygons without records. They call them polygons without a record in the assessing software. And I'm assuming they couldn't call them owner unknown because they didn't even start, they had no clue. I mean, basically it was an owner unknown. Why they weren't owner unknowns, I'm not quite sure. But they not only, the definition of the way miscellaneous parcels are parcels of land that the town had no idea where they were located, who owned them, what size they were, or any information about them because they didn't know where they were. They had no map parcel because they weren't located. They had no knowledge of where they were.
So how did they know it they existed?
I have no idea.
Oh, sorry.
I don't know where
Even
they
though they're miscellaneous if you don't know where they
I
are.
don't, we had someone call shortly after I arrived that said, I just inherited this parcel from my grandfather, they lived out in California. Could you tell me where it is? I got a tax bill for it. I just got a tax bill for it. And we said, oh, no, we can't tell you where it is. We don't know where it is. Oh, well, how big is it? Well, we can't tell you how big it is. We don't know how big it is. So you mean I inherited this land from my grandfather, but you don't know where it is, what size it is, but I got a tax bill for it.
How can you assess taxes on something you don't know what the size is? I mean, how can you do that? I mean, how is it properly?
Is there a camera on me?
No, I'm just saying, I'm
Yes,
trying to
there is.
understand.
Well, my understanding was that at some point, somebody decided,
I'm sorry for everything all those facial expressions.
that someone decided that some of these miscellaneous things would be taxed as if it was 1 acre, even not knowing what it is.
Well,
They just,
because they didn't
used
know,
it.
exactly, because they didn't know where it was or what size it was or whether it was wet, dry, on the water, anything about it, all the miscellaneouses that I've seen, I can't say all, but everything I've seen was assessed generically at 1 acre, at 50% of whatever the average assessed value of an acre of land in Harwich was at the time. And so they're all relatively low values. They're all, they really have, they're not assessed at full and fair, for sure.
right. I
Because
mean,
we don't know.
It could be 10 acres, could be
It could be
20 acres, who
exactly.
knows?
There was no, because and it could be wet, dry, or on the water, we don't know, because there was no location. Every once in a while, some of the miscellaneouses will have a street. Where that came from, I don't know either. But at one point in time, I mean, that story gets better. I don't know. I won't go there. But anyway, leave it to say that we're working on the miscellaneouses. It's been an issue because, like when we started this project, when we started looking at various parcels, and we said, oh, okay, we got one. We found followed the chain of title. We now can say with determination that this parcel's right here, and this is how big it is, and we know all about this parcel, and this is its value. But then we had to go look at this list of, at that one point, it was like 140 some odd parcels of miscellaneous to make sure that it wasn't one of those. So we then had to go through all of those parcels to see if there were any deeds or anything at all, any references that matched this new parcel that we had, that we just found. And in many cases, some of these that were revised, we did find that they had been assessed as a miscellaneous parcel, but it was just very low. And that's why when you see this report, it says the original value and what it was, and the revised value, like the very first one, the original value was 380. That's not a good one. That's a different thing. But the original value, like the second one down,
Second
was like 19,700. But actually, when we found out where it was and all about it, we valued it at 157,000. So then we were able to do a revised assessment. So there was already a tax bill issued on that given parcel, but it was for the wrong amount. So when we corrected the amount, that revised the tax bill, and we sent out a supplemental tax bill for the balance.
I'll give you a couple of examples of that. There's the Colson property at the corner of Gilbert Lane and Sixpenny Lane. I was surprised when it came up on the market, and the trust ended up picking up the bog. All the upland was broken up into other parcels. And that was the number 2, I think, that was on the Zero Campground Road. Of late, because the trust is acquiring the Colson property at the end of Spruce Road, there are plans that identify all of the Coppolas properties up in that area. Now, this is north of the sand pit, north of Cornelius Pond, up close to Route 6. And I was surprised when I saw some of the plans of where Coppolas has identified where he thinks the property is. I have read the deeds, and I knew that some of the miscellaneous parcels were up in that area, according to, it was Aunt Edie's pond. But one piece was a section of a bog. And, it's probably, I know how big the bog is, it's not that large. You probably get half of it, if that, maybe half an acre. He's been billed at an acre. Another parcel up there where he's got solid lines in some cases and dotted lines on other, because he's not sure where it really was. It turned out to be 8.7 acres. So, there are deeds, but when you read the deed, it's, as Gail pointed out, by Smith, by Jones, et cetera, and what's that mean? And that's where surveyors go out and look for what we refer to as features. Frequently out in the woods, you'll find a trench dug just in a straight line. And that's the way they would mark them. But they're not mentioned that way in the deed. It's just, that's a feature that kind of gives you an indication of where those things are. That's how
But
surveyors
their
do it.
existence as a miscellaneous parcel is because there is a deed someplace.
Yep.
We can't necessarily locate it on the ground. We don't necessarily know how big it is, but somebody's got some piece of paper saying, here's a piece of land.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's been an issue too, because people have been coming in with those pieces of paper, those deeds, and saying, I own this, but it wasn't, no one in the office was really able to check it and say, yes, you do. So it was creating a lot of frustration in a lot of people's parts. Their family had owned that land for generations, and they had a deed. So we're now following up on a lot of those as well. We just have time constraints. That's our biggest issue, is time constraints right now in the assessing office. But I wanted to, Dave brought up a really good point. One of the reasons why this is such an issue is back in the day, when people used to heat and cook by wood, they were the woodlots. And so, we see a lot of those where there's a deed with 2 parcels on it, and one is the house lot, and it's very well defined. So many rods by so many links and chains and that kind of thing, and it's very well defined. And it takes up half the page. And then there's one sentence, and my woodlot. And everybody knew where Jones's woodlot was. There was no question about it. Everybody knew, because it was right next to Tom's and on the other side of Sue's, and, you know, everybody knew where it was. So they didn't have to really delineate it and call it out in a deed. It just went with it. And over the years, it's now, okay, now they're parcels. Where are they?
Yeah.
Where are these woodlots? And, you know, they're oddly shaped. They're usually long, narrow lots, because they were just cutting timber. They didn't intend to build a house on it. And sometimes people would buy two woodlots and build them together now and, you know, build a house on it. So that's the challenge on a lot of these parcels. So, and in what you're mentioning, in a lot of these cases, and that's, I have seen a lot, where it's so vague. It's so vague. You know, even on the assessor's maps, when they used to hand draw on the Mylars here before digital mapping, there's dotted lines. And so a lot of times what people will do is collaborate, and they'll say, okay, well, my family owned over here, your family owned over here, there was a little bit of gray area in the middle, those are those dotted lines. So, you know, we'll go to land court, or we'll decide, I'll swap you this for that, you sign off on your ownership interest, possible ownership interest in this parcel, you swap me that for this, and you sign off on mine, and I'll sign off on yours, and basically, in essence, it clears the title, because whatever gray overlap there was, it can clear the title. Now, to really do it definitively, in which in some cases they've actually gone to land court with it, and land court definitively, whatever land court, they are the final word, they are the finish line as far as ownership goes. They say this, and once they say this is this, then that is that, and forever hold your peace. So that is possibly the course of action for some of these private individuals. As a town, we have the foreclosure option. If we bill it, it doesn't get paid. It creates that eminent domain foreclosure auction.
Kathy?
Yeah, so what would you say are the priorities of your office after you take care of the business of assessing, which obviously is number one for the town? Or is it owners unknown? Is it miscellaneous properties? What's the priority order for what, when you have extra time to work on?
Okay, that's a great question. That's our strategy going forward. So right now, January is just like crazy busy because tax bills just went out. The actual third quarter actual bill, December and November and December were crazy busy, trying to get the values finalized, having the classification hearing, getting the tax rate set, getting the closing of the year, starting that, all the financials, getting the tax rate approved, and getting the bills out. We have a new bill printing company, so that was a challenge because they had to format the bills, and we had to continually vet them to make sure the bills came out right. Still came out on two pieces of paper, but still, I mean, there were issues, but still. So now, we had as many as 80 phone calls in one day a few weeks ago when the bills first came out. Just the real estate market went crazy, values went up significantly, and people had questions from everything from, I sold the house, why isn't my name on it? We have January 1st assessment date by law, so if anybody sold it after January 1st, the old owner's name's on it, the new owner's isn't on it, and so there were a lot of questions about that. I changed my mailing address, didn't get my bill. Yeah, it's been wild and woolly for the month of January. So February 1st, the abatement process ends February 1st, the taxes are due February 1st, so we're hoping February we have to start opening up a little window. We now have 2 full-time people in the office. We've had our vacancies in our office in the administrative assistant position, which basically just leaves Carly all by herself 2 days a week when I'm not there. And so now we have our second person has been there about a month and a half or so she's getting up to speed, which is excellent, she's doing a great job. So it really, we have to have that person if Carly and I are going to work on this project, and it's a big project. You need somebody printing deeds, pulling plans, printing plans, 2 eyes, because we end up with just all this paper everywhere, trying to do this work. My strategy, our strategy, going forward, unless I get other direction, I mean, as projects like the Jude Eldridge piece, if those requests come in, they kind of go to the front of the line. But my strategy is, I'll get to that in 1 second. First, when we started this thing, I found out that the assessing maps hadn't been updated since 2018. The contract expired with the existing GIS mapping company, was never, they went out of business. And so when I went to go look at this, parcels, I realized that there was no new, the assessor's maps were so outdated, they weren't that usable. It's like, okay, we start to kind of get a little traction going, and then like, oh, right, now we have to find a mapping company and get these maps updated. So we polled all the Cape Towns, found out who they liked the best. We got 3 quotes. We did the whole contract thing. We had to get money. I went through all of that, and then we had to start going through plans. We realized since 2018 they hadn't been updated. So we started going through all mapping changes back to 2018, and that's how we found some of these as well. Some of these came from, we found plans that had not been entered in the system, subdivision plans, things like that, that hadn't been assessed as the plan they'd been subdivided. So we had to go in and add all those records, do omitted assessments for those. We went through every single plan from 2018 forward and compiled them all together in a form that the mapping company could work with, noting all the necessary changes. And then we spent probably 3 or 4 months, 5 months maybe, back and forth. Took a couple of months for the mapping company to make 5 years worth of changes on the maps, and they were brand new. They were our brand new mapping company, so they were just kind of getting our files oriented and set up on their side. So we finally got our maps done, printed. We now have color maps, and then we contracted with them to put them on the website. So now they're on the assessing website. Beautiful color maps that are up to date. And we started, so there's all kinds of aerial photographs and layers that people can use, so you can look up a parcel. They're searchable now. All we had before were just Mylars, pictures of the Mylars.
Right.
And now they're searchable. So that gave us a foundation, a base to do our research from. So to me, the easiest thing for me, that as I can see, is to use the resources that we already have. Start with the ones that we have Fowler reports from. The work's already been done. To get as many parcels in the system if we have documentations, get the deeds, get the plans, get all of that all tightened up. So if there's some modifications done that need to be done to any of the maps, get everything on the maps and in the system as accurate as we can with work that's already been done. It's almost done. It just, from what I've seen, a lot of them, if they need a little bit more, that's just a little bit more to be brought current. But a lot of them, it's just a matter of reading it, understanding it, and going, sure, done. And once we do that, as we start on some of these larger parcels, hopefully we'll have some of those pieces filled in for us already. We'll have those 1 acres, 2 acres where they've been subdivided and split out. We'll have that ownership in the system. We'll have more records. So then when we're starting from air and we just have this shape from nothing, we'll have valid butters around the edges. We'll have data that we can look at, and we can start to print and pull those deeds and plans, and we'll start to hopefully match up, and names will emerge for that parcel that we're looking for in the center. And so to me, that sounds like the most expeditious and efficient way to tackle this project. It's not going to be the easiest for people who've been waiting anxiously for many, many years to get this data. But I do think it's the best use of our time and the town's resources we do have this budget now where if we're uncertain about things, we're certainly going to use recommend the use of the funds for surveying work. I think that's going to be necessary in many of these cases. Even if we do find deeds and we know who owns it, and we have sort of, loosely constructed rods and chain measurements or something like that, I still think it would be helpful to have it surveyed to really tighten up these boundaries. I think that would be a good use of the town's resources. Yes?
With $500,000, you've talked about, using it for surveys, and that's certainly very important. Could this thing be jump-started by getting some more staff just working on this full-time?
That's been proposed, and it's being discussed. Staff budgeting has to go through town meeting, and it goes through a whole lot of layers before that.
Mm-hmm.
So that I can't say. To me, that's a good use of town resources, but it's not for me to say. It would be very helpful. I can tell you that. It would be very helpful.
It sounds like you guys have to do sort of the initial groundwork on a parcel in order to even hire a surveyor and say, this is what we want you to do. And you've got a lot of other things that you're working on. It seems like if there was somebody who was really dedicated to this and this alone, it could move a lot more quickly.
Well, at one point, like Michael Ford was working for the town. He was on the staff for the town.
Yeah.
And he was doing that. We wouldn't bring in a surveyor until we had pretty much found who owned it and where it was, and we had done our part.
Right.
We would, like we did with the Eldridge property.
Right.
We would do our part first, and then bring the surveyor in. They would flesh out, but we would give them the body of works. So it would reduce the cost significantly. If we just set them out in the field without any kind of really decent information, it would cost a lot more.
That's why I'm raising it. It just seems like both from an efficiency standpoint, and also, just moving things along. There's so much groundwork that needs to be done in your office before you can hire a needed consultant, whether it's a surveyor or a title researcher or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
It just seems like it would make sense to, I realize this isn't your decision, but I'm wondering if we might be able to nudge the selectmen in that direction.
It's being nudged
Mhm.
as
Yeah.
we speak. Yeah, it has.
Yeah.
Here's the selectmen keep asking us for more. We gave them all this, right? They wanted us to keep going, give us more. But our concern, and I use our, the Queen's are, we don't know, we would like to know what happened with the ones we've already recommended. Has there been any progress? Are any of them, I know some have already gone to foreclosure, some were the low value. I know they're off this list. But we would like to know if there's progress being done on, especially the ones that are highlighted, which we feel are the top priority. So if you have any thoughts on those, is there anything in the near future where you see these being worked on? I'm sorry, Gail.
No, that's okay. That's okay. It's a good question. And to be honest with you, I have to say that at this point in time, we did look at the ones that are highlighted in green initially when we first were working in the spring when we located these. And we found out that they looked very attractive because of their size. But the initial ones we started to look at, they weren't that big. They've been subdivided, and they were going to be a lot of work. There's a lot of work required to find out the ownership on those. So to be honest with you, we backburnered those
Yeah.
because we didn't have the time to really dig in, and all that time would be spent on just that one parcel instead of many parcels that we literally have banker's boxes full of these title searches that have been done. And so it just made more sense to work on those first.
Well, see,
And
the-
perhaps
but
some of
here's the
those may be
problem.
in there.
Here's the problem, using Little Shaver as an example. It's being nibbled away around the edges. And as time goes on, it's getting to the point where it's not gonna be of any value to the town, because eventually it's all gonna be. So that's lost. That's gonna be lost because of lack of attention to it. And it's not, I mean, this has been going on for years, so it's not just right now. But that's what happens, you know?
But that's what happens too. It's not that, it's very likely that's what already has happened.
Right.
Oftentimes, when people buy a large parcel, they'll carve out anything with frontage, and they'll landlock the inside, because they can put houses, they'll go for the easiest, just like where I'm talking about, going for the easiest
Right.
parcels. So they'll do the least expensive parcels, they'll put in, the least amount of roads that they need to put in, and so they'll chip away. So that's when we start to look at these large parcels that nobody knows where they are, who owns them, or anything. It's because over the years, they've already chipped away those fringe pieces and built. Unfortunately, in a lot of these cases, what we find, I mean, like I said, we're still in the early phases of this project, is that if there's anything of value, people have already been to land court about it. They've paid title researchers tens of thousands of dollars to find them. If they're one of the heirs, if they're, it's their family that owned the whole thing decades ago, and they've tracked down their relatives, and they've done the work if there's value to the parcels.
Right.
So a lot of them are like Dave said, it's a bog, or half of a bog, or half of this, or it's landlocked. It would be very expensive to get to it. So in a lot of cases, if people have been motivated to spend the money to do the work that's required, to, especially people whose family has owned land for generations. So it's not necessarily that it's because of inaction that it's being chipped away. It's oftentimes because of the value of the land as it is increased over the years. There's been a willingness to search the titles and buy it from whomever owned it.
Right, no, yeah.
Could I ask one more question? You mentioned that the town has just recently updated the assessor's maps. Do the subdivisions that you've referenced for some of these large parcels show up on those new maps?
If in fact we had one, in some cases, yes. In some cases, if going for the 60 acres or whatever the large parcel was, we did find a deed for a little acre parcel on the edge.
Mm-hmm.
We separated that out, yes.
Okay. Well, I think it would be
Do you
great for
wanna
us to
bring
look at
up-
those.
Do you want to bring up?
No,
Okay,
it's a separate discussion.
okay, all right.
Yeah.
Any other questions for Gail? Anything?
It's quite a
Wow.
big task in front of
Yeah,
you.
yeah.
Oh, that was one other thing I wanted to mention about the title company and stuff. And, it's wonderful that the town said, okay, they saw this needed to get done, so $500,000 is a lot of money to put towards this. And there is always the option of saying, okay, well, we'll just, we'll gladly give them whatever we have, pack it all up and give it to a title attorney. However, and I've shared this, with the selectmen and the town administrator, that in my experience, because many towns were faced with this back in, like I said, the 2000s, when GIS mapping was just starting, and almost every single town had parcels that were unidentified, because there was never that computerized methodology of
Right.
matching those things together. And now we get reports whenever they do mapping of parcels, polygons without records, and records without polygons. So we get that information. At that point in time, towns were hiring title attorneys to come in and do that work. It was very expensive. That's when they started doing owner unknown and things like that, because towns just didn't have the budget to do that. I mean, in some cases, like going back to the 1800s, depends on how far back you're going. But back then, I had gotten quotes of like $100,000 a parcel. So, you know, it was like, that's how it came back to the assessors, because the towns were saying, you know, we have 200 of these, like, that's not an option. So they said, you know, so it might take a while, but do your best, and what you can't find, we'll assess owner unknown and go through the auction process like we're doing here. And so that's what most towns did that didn't have those kind of deep pockets. And, you know, so I had suggested to them that, at least at the very least, maybe that's still part of the strategy, but at the very least, if we take all those resources that we have, all those existing title searches, and the work that the town's already paid for, if we take all of those and we put all of those in, if they're in fact, if we concur after we research them and we validate that research and we concur and we said, yes, that is where this parcel is, and this is these heirs are the ones that own it, or the name, whatever it is the person that owns it, and we put it on the map, we map it properly, maybe we have it surveyed, and we create the record and send out a tax bill. And if we do all of those, and I can't tell you how many there are because I don't know yet, but once we do all those, and now maybe we have 25 or we have 30 or 40 of them, maybe we send those out to a site. I don't know. You know, we'll know that better when we can quantify it and we can see. If we try and we can't, then the town decides, well, let's just do it owner unknown, or no, let's send it out to a title company. Then that'll be a more informed decision. And so, you know, they basically said, go for it, you know, to do that. And that's what we're doing. That's what we're continuing to do. My contract expires the end of June, and and hopefully by that time we'll have an assessor that's been hired, and we'll have 3 full-time people in the office, and so they'll have been trained by the end of June, and so they can carry on, and maybe I might come in a little bit every once in a while, but hopefully we'll have more of a staff. Maybe we'll have 4 people, which would be awesome. And we'll see how that goes. And so that will just become part of the regular duties of the office until it's as done as we can get it.
Can I just ask, is your office who determines to say that property is a land of low value?
Collector.
The tax collector does that?
Well, actually, the value itself does that. There is a law. It's defined by law, the low value
It's
value.
under 20,000 or
Yes,
something like that.
So we establish the value for the parcel.
Okay,
So the assessing office establishes the value for every parcel.
right,
And so if the assessed value of any given parcel is below 20,000
right,
per statute, it used to be 5, so it's, you know, they continually amend it as
Right.
the world changes.
okay, so that's under the tax collectors, okay,
Yeah, but they do the foreclosure, they establish land, that it is a parcel with land of low value, that it can be auctioned, and
Right.
they then carry out the auction.
right, thank you. Good, thank you. Gail, thank you so much. Are we good?
Yeah.
Are you all good?
Yeah.
Thank you so
Thanks a
much.
lot.
You're
I
very
mean,
welcome.
It's really a learning process for all of us, and, you know, we're just trying to do what we've been charged to do, but, you know,
It's a big project.
it is. It
It's
certainly
an
is.
interesting committee. I'm sitting here, my wheels are turning for the future.
Thank you so
Once I
much.
retire again. Thank you.
I don't think we're gonna let you go.
Thank you, Gail.
Thank
That
you
was
so much.
perfect. That was perfect.
I learned a lot in that process.
Yeah, me too.
Michelle? Michelle?
Yes.
Come on up. I'm sorry you came in after we had, already started, so I'm sorry you had to spend.
No, I had to drop my kids at Sturgis, so I rushed back.
Can you introduce yourself to the?
Oh,
community?
yeah. I'm Michelle Galucci, and I just joined the Finance Committee. I was appointed in October, and they asked me to pick another committee to be a liaison to, and I thought this was a really interesting committee, so this is the one I chose.
Oh, thank you.
So I just wanted to come today just to introduce myself. I love meeting people in person.
Let's introduce ourselves too, so
Yeah.
she knows who we are.
Kathy Green.
Kathy?
Margot Fenn.
Margot, nice to
Elaine
meet you.
Shovlin.
Marcy Smith.
Dave Callahan.
Nice to meet you. Yeah, so, I'm going to try to come to your meetings regularly if I can, just
Oh,
because
sure.
I think it's really interesting subject matter. Just so you know a little bit about me, I've been an owner of a property here in Harwich for 10 years. And I have 2 children and a husband, and we moved here full-time in 2019. Had nothing to do with the pandemic, we made the decision. I'm originally from Massachusetts. I grew up in Norwood, Massachusetts. My father still lives there. I have family here, off Cape. And so I decided that I wanted to just get involved in what's going on in the town. I love the town. And this is an interesting area for me. My background, just so you know, I have an MBA in finance and healthcare management, and really good with numbers and modeling. And so I thought I'd dedicate my time and my skills to the finance committee.
Oh, thank you. Thank
Yeah.
you. Yeah.
So, and I like this subject matter. I find it really interesting, the historical aspects as well as just the financial impact on the town with respect to identifying these properties and, assessing them and,
Right,
So-
someone just recently said that this may be one of the only committees in town that has the ability to make money for the town as opposed to costing
yeah, yeah.
money. Never thought of it that way, but Kathy
Well,
knows
how do
she's
you interact with the Harwich Conservation Trust? Because I find what they do very interesting as well.
Usually when they're interested in a property in Harwich, they'll bring it to us and we partner, if we agree, we partner with them to
Nice.
support them. And if they're going for Community Preservation Act funding, then we may partner with them and support it.
That's great, yeah,
Yeah, but it's a partnership.
okay.
Yeah.
So I'm available if anybody needs, anything from the Finance Committee, feel free to reach out to me, and I'm happy to
Great.
help in any way.
Okay.
And like I said, I'm looking forward to try and participate in your meetings as much as I can. I do have 2 kids in high school, so I have a little flexibility there, so thank you for having me today.
And again, I'm sorry that,
Oh, no, I found this all very, very
Okay.
interesting.
well, anytime, you're always welcome.
All right, thank you so much. Good to meet you all.
Yep. Okay. Chair's report. I was invited to a meeting with Jeff Handler, who is the vice chair of the local planning, is it committee or commission? I see both
Committee,
used.
committee.
Committee. So I met with him on Thursday, January 12th. He wanted to know all about our committee, what we do, how we go about it, all the information I guess he's bringing back to the planning committee. He did write a nice report and wants to work with us, communicate with us once in a while, keep in touch, because I think we're all looking at the same, we're looking at housing, we're looking at land, we're looking at the plan for the town, which, we should all be involved in. So that was very informative, and I think it's the beginning of a relationship that'll help all our committees. I attended Affordable Housing Trust meetings in November. I was at their meeting on December 12th, and then came back that evening for or stayed for the joint meeting with the Board of Selectmen. I was also last week on the 17th at their meeting, Not too much to be said.
No,
Kathy was there
they
too.
did have a site visit with their consultant on the morning of the 17th, which apparently went very well. She couldn't make the meeting in the afternoon, but I believe she'll be there next week.
Yeah,
so.
yeah, next Monday is their next
It's on
meeting.
the Marceline property?
No, a site visit on all the properties that the trust owns
Oh.
currently.
Wow.
So they can help develop a strategy and an action plan. So I guess that's as much as we could
Yeah,
say, what's all we
so
know right now.
It was
So.
the 6 properties that
Okay.
we had
Okay.
recommended, and then, were turned over to them, deeded to them eventually. Yes, I think having, it's Jen Golson as the person who's going to help them with their plan. It's a step in the right direction, finally. A lot of controversy, a lot of whatever, but it's moving along. It's moving along. I also met with the new town planner, Mr. Halkiotis. Had a nice little chat with him, and he probably will be at our meeting next month. He would like to just come in and meet us and, introduce himself and get to know us. I've been busy. I also spoke with Bob Lawson. He's now the interim tax collector downstairs, filling in until they hire a new
Lawton.
tax
Lawton.
collector. Lawson. Yeah, Bob
Lawton with a
Lawson.
T.
Lawton.
Oh, it is a T? Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Oh, I know somebody Lawson, that's why that slipped, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Bob. I had a nice chat with him, so I told him that we would get together and, again, update the tax list and see where, some of these properties, whether they've been sent for foreclosure, or if they've come off, if people come in and made payment plan, they're trying to get, but of course, he's new too, to it, so it's gonna take him a while to get up to speed. Yes, Kathy?
Yeah, Tuesday night's meeting. How did that go
The selectmen.
with the selectmen?
Oh. Oh.
Were you not gonna report on that?
No, I will. On their agenda was priorities for
You saw that.
Real Estate and Open Space Committee. And they did not offer any priorities other than keep doing what you're doing a good job, we're all with what you
Attaboy.
gave us.
What was the purpose
There was
of
no
the
direction.
agenda item? Was it just to bring us up to date on what had transpired so far? Has any,
It just said priorities for the real estate. I thought they were gonna give us more direction, but no, didn't happen.
well, what did you take, what was your takeaway? Was the gist of their having that as an agenda item?
I thought they were going to give us more direction. That did not happen.
Okay.
All they did was say that we were doing a good job, and they thought that everything we did was, and that was it. So I don't
Okay.
understand why it was on the
All
agenda
right.
either. Now, Mr. McCaskill had said he would be here this morning, so that was gonna be
Okay,
the question, but
Okay.
Unfortunately, he
Okay.
didn't make it.
I would recommend that you watch the YouTube version of the
Okay, sure.
Selectmen's meeting.
Yeah.
sure,
It starts at 4:41 in,
thank you.
and
For-
it lasts about
What,
2 minutes. 4:41 on.
Okay, so
The
therefore I don't have to
January
watch the whole thing.
It's,
Okay.
it's not very long.
Okay, that's fine, thank
But I
you.
found it this morning, because
Okay,
Yeah.
I missed it. I
Okay.
was trying to be there, and I got to
All
the
right.
meeting, and Elaine said it's already been,
oh, all right, thank you,
Covered.
thank you.
But you
Okay.
were there in time for the,
The Judah Eldridge.
Eldridge.
Which,
Oh, do you have something to report on that?
just what I said recently, that they have decided to take it by eminent domain. It is gonna be posted, legal has already dealt with it, it's gonna be posted in the newspaper. They said it should be in by the 26th.
I can't remember the date.
Yeah, but it has to go into 14 days. So it's gonna be in the paper twice. It's gonna be, the
Mhm.
And will it
notice
be
is
in
gonna be.
Cape Cod Times or the Chronicle or?
I'm sure they'll do both,
Okay.
I would think. They usually do the Chronicle for sure, but I'm
I'm
sure
just
it'll be
curious.
in both. Dave?
I'm a bit concerned about the parcel
Yeah,
that
I
Gail's
don't-
talking
I
about
don't get
versus
that
the
either.
26 acres, which is what, town meeting had proposed on taking. I hope this isn't gonna end up, causing a problem.
Well, yeah, I'm concerned
I-
about the way she was talking about, once you get the big parcels, then you have these little subdivisions, and if the one she's working on is a subdivision of the one.
Well, that's the reason I said I'm gonna try to meet with her after this meeting, because,
Yeah.
to make sure that she's not talking about a portion of that 26
ours,
acres. 'cause
yeah.
It sounded like.
That's a
Yeah, Yeah.
very big difference.
yeah.
Okay.
Um,
But
And,
Elaine, you said something about they needed to come back to town meeting? Why do they need to come back to town meeting? It was already voted,
I suspect
yes.
the problem is that town meeting approved the CPC funding. If, I haven't had the time
Yep,
to get my numbers straight, but as I remember, in 2018, that property was appraised at, surprisingly enough, exactly what the assessed value was,
mm-hmm,
which was just a little bit less than what the back
Mhm.
taxes were. Well, it's been delayed so long, the value of that property's going up significantly.
mm-hmm.
And I think they're anticipating a new appraisal is gonna come in,
Mhm.
and they're gonna have to,
Have they,
because here's, I'm
Okay.
guessing this, and I was hoping Mike was gonna be here, because I was gonna try to get some clarity. But he said they will be taking it for back taxes and the CPC funds.
Hmm.
All right? Because remember, there was discussion about the money has to go, if you're doing a taking like that, you have to put money aside for, I think, I remember it was 3 years.
3 years, you have to escrow it,
And
yeah.
it would sit there in a pot in case any
Heirs came forward.
heirs came forward and said, I want my money. All right? My big question has always been, what happens if nobody shows up?
Mhm.
And nobody would give me an answer what was gonna happen there, although rumor was that they were just gonna take it and move it over into the, the general
General
fund.
fund.
Take it, that they would pay the taxes with that.
But that,
And if you remember correctly,
Yes.
that was my complaint
right,
at
But
town
then that
meeting,
was
is
clearly-
the fact that I don't think that that's an appropriate, and Leo got up and said, oh, it's just moving money from one place to another.
right,
And then I couldn't get it, I tried to get up and speak to that thing.
Right.
They canceled it. So I don't know whether Mike has to now come up, because let's say that the new assessed value, rather than being 360,000, is 700,000. So they gotta come up with another, X dollars
to put into escrow.
To put in that
to
fund.
put in that escrow account.
Okay,
And so they may have to go to town meeting to ask that. I'm pure speculation on this.
Right.
All right, I probably shouldn't be doing this on a recorded meeting, but the timeframes here have been very, very short and haven't been able to cover it. But I think that's why it may end up. But what Mike's description was at the selectmen's meeting, I almost got up and asked questions, but I'll tell you, the meeting was it dragged on pretty long at that point. I did not want to tie up that meeting. I figured we could do something afterwards.
mm-hmm, okay.
My question is, the $360,000 was CPA money.
Correct.
If that's in the escrow for 3 years, at the end of 3 years, that money, does that money go back to CPA?
We've asked that question several times,
Okay.
and we've never gotten a straight answer. Originally, as Dave said, it was said that it was gonna be used to pay off the taxes, but
Right.
then, a couple years later, in a town meeting, it was said, that is not what we said, that is not gonna happen. We would not use that money to pay off, do you remember that? Like, back taxes. So then the question is what happens to the money? And I've asked the question several times, at Community Preservation Committee meetings, and we've not gotten an answer.
Now that we have finance
I don't think finance,
liaison.
I don't think
whether-
finance would know.
They wouldn't, okay.
Yeah.
No.
I'm just,
What about the tax collector?
it's a door we gotta keep knocking on.
What about the tax collector? Because if they were thinking about paying off the taxes, wouldn't the tax collector?
Well, but now they say they're not paying off the taxes with it, because actually, that is actually a bad practice,
Yeah.
to use taxpayer money to pay off taxes. So I think that's why they backed off of that, but I don't know the answer.
There's more questions now that they're getting close to it and the rules are changing. I don't think anybody knows.
Yeah. All I know was the last thing he said about it, I'd like to get it resolved so
Yep.
we can bring it to town meeting in
Mike's
May.
pushing it,
Okay.
Okay,
but if it's, that'll have to go to town meeting, because it's an eminent domain taking.
yeah, but it was already, the first article, when the CPA, when it received CPA funding, specifically says to take by eminent domain if so
Did it say?
declared.
Okay.
So
Maybe
it doesn't
it's-
have to go back for that. If they're
maybe the
going back, it's
balance of the money.
because of extra
A
funding.
change in value
Yeah,
or
okay.
something.
You know.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know they've already done the survey, and I guess the second appraisal is pending, or,
You can go out and walk the property and see what kind of,
And every single delay costs more money,
yeah, yeah.
you know, because now it's 5 years later, and, you know, the survey costs have increased,
Oh,
appraisal
yeah.
costs have increased.
Everything's gone up.
You know, the tax lien is almost twice as much now.
Yeah.
600,000.
Right. And it was 360 or something.
Yeah,
So, yeah,
well,
The
tough.
value of the land itself
right.
is probably tripled, given what we're seeing. Well, I did a comparison with the Freitas property that we looked at.
Mm.
Remember, there was the 8 acres over by Little Shaver. And that ended up selling for about $100,000 an acre.
Mm.
Yeah.
And if you use that, and I'm not saying you should, I think, you know, obviously this is just a very rough estimate. The Judah Eldridge is worth a lot of money.
It's a 24-acre parcel, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, well, it's a conundrum.
yeah, well, just keep questioning.
Yep.
Yep.
And
Okay.
till we get a decent answer. Member reports. Dave, anything other?
I'm not
You
gonna
wanna-
hold up a
No?
meeting for that. Just that, quickly, I've got maps and so forth. But I was mapping out the trails at Island Pond with a GPS and discovered a trail that is not part of the official trail system over there, but it was fairly heavily traveled. And it actually goes from, if you know, the trail down from the parking lot on Queen Anne, and it then curls around over the bike trail. It turns out there's a trail off to the, heads west, underneath the transfer station and over to Flax Pond and everything. And there's a whole set of
Yeah, it's
what are
mount-
called social
mount-
trails back
Mountain
there.
bikers,
Pardon?
mountain bikers ride in there a lot.
Yeah, and so I walked it one day, and so by that time I was walking the rest of Island Pond. I was pretty tired, so I quit. Went back, and went back another day, found another trail. Thought I was going into the one I came out of, but it turned out to be another trail, brought me in. I still haven't had the time to go back and finish that trail map. But it appears to have taken over some of the parcels that had been brought to us before. But this last trail curled me back around up to Queen Anne. And there's gonna be some, there's all kinds of survey markers up there
Yeah,
about some parcels
That's
that
the
are,
Hall property,
about the Hall property.
yeah,
So you're aware of that?
yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
And so I just wanted to let everybody know that that's happening. I know that that area is one that the town was considering for the potential of a treatment plant for wastewater.
Mm.
And it looks to me like that could be, the opportunities there could be shrinking if we're not
Yeah.
careful. If the town isn't, careful about what's going on, it may be an area we should be spending some more attention
Well,
on.
then maybe what we need to do is to make this one of our new priorities, and bring it to their attention and let them know what's going on.
Yeah, well, that was, I mean,
Oh.
when she was talking, it sounded to me like she was describing that area when she was talking about when they started looking at it, they discovered that it had already been broken into
For us
smaller
to take.
pieces and so
Yeah, sure.
Oh, okay.
So, that, yeah, we might want to dig into this some more.
They are.
What I'm passing around here, they're all stapled,
I
just
got-
take
I got-
one.
Yep.
I've already broken
I
them.
figured it out.
Um,
I figured it out. I figured
These,
it out.
these are maps that I presented back in 2019, and then the second page is later data from 2022. And if you hold them together and flip them back and forth, you'll see that some of those parcels over there are now on the tax lien that had, in 2019 were owners unknown. Now, when I say owners unknown, my definition is a little broader than what Gail's talking about. Those are parcels that may be in her database and are being taxed, as well as properties that were, have no map and parcel ID on them. So, and those are in different shades of pink. But anyway,
That's what I was
a
gonna ask you.
couple of
What's-
these parcels have come
What's
in.
pink? Pink is, I know what the others are.
Pink, the light pink is what she considers to be, they have no parcel ID on them, okay? Now, there's a big pink on the other side of the, on the right-hand side there is, I've already sent Gail some information on that. Again, some miscellaneous parcels. I've got plans for it and everything else. The stuff that's in the deeper pink was, I believe, is the stuff that had no map and parcel ID on it in 2019.
So this.
And
big
you look
red-
and you see over in 2022, a couple of those things have appeared. At least they know who owns it now. But I think that's an area we should be trying to preserve. Now, you may want to get Dan Pelletier in, or contact him about what he might be.
Yeah, Dan is due to come back to us with.
I didn't mean to take that much time.
No,
but I'm
that-
trying to,
that's
trying to
fine.
set your future. I will call in for the,
Yes,
the
and I
meeting
did
and
speak to town clerk.
Yep.
And she is going to give me the code for you to use to call in for the meeting, okay? Marcia, anything?
No, I'm good.
Kathy, anything?
No,
Nothing. I guess CPC now, February meeting is where you'll make your decision on some of those.
yeah.
Okay, good. Anything, Margot?
Just the local planning committee is putting the finishing touches on a request for proposals for the update of the local comprehensive plan. And one of the things that I've suggested, I don't know if this will end up being approved, but I suggested that we include in the scope of work for that an update of the open space and recreation plan for the town, because that's overdue,
It's over,
yeah, so.
yeah. And they can't apply for some grants if they don't, if that's
Yeah,
not
that's right. That's right.
updated.
It's really important that we
critical.
get it back,
Right.
updated. So,
I would ask that, let's, get some agenda items for the next meeting, which I believe would be February 17th. So any suggestions? Dave, email me something on this beforehand so I can put it on the agenda?
I will, I'm
No,
hopefully.
just a sentence.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, I
that's
think
all.
that you mentioned already about having the town planner.
Yes.
It's definitely gonna be on there. I don't know. Those would be the two things. But I've also got another suggestion of an area that we may wanna start looking at, and that is actually north of this parcel. And that's the other side of Route 6. The selectmen own a big chunk of property there. That was
Yeah.
gonna be the golf course.
They call it
And
headwaters,
next-
yeah.
And east of that is a whole bunch of other
yeah,
owners unknown stuff.
Mhm.
And we may want to give that some attention.
okay.
Okay, so just a sentence for each one so I can put it on the agenda. This is the report that Jeff Handler is going to bring back to your
Oh, okay,
committee. There's a
okay.
copy of it. You can pass
Thank
that
you.
down to Dave, just so you know what he thinks of us. And please ignore anything about me.
I
because-
got one.
You got one?
Yeah.
Okay.
So,
All right. Good meeting.
Anything else? We're all good?
Motion to
Take a
adjourn?
motion to adjourn? Second? Anybody?
Anybody
second.
second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right.
Yay! Thank you very much.